Hi, my name's Graham Large. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm starting a series of fictional short stories. Each one features people who meet Jesus and are healed by him. We don't know a lot about them. With some people we don't know their names or much about their lives, but we do know that they were all changed by their encounter with Jesus of Nazareth and would be changed forever. I guess none of them realised that they would appear in the Bible and we would read about them 2,000 years later. As I said at the beginning, these stories are fictional, but I thought it would be interesting if, through my imagination, we could get a glimpse of what it must have been like for them. My hope is that you enjoy these stories and that it encourages you to read the Bible and discover them and Jesus for yourself. At the end of the story, I'll give you the passages from the Bible that the stories are based on. I'm going to start with the story of the woman with the issue of blood and Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They're joined together by their stories in the Bible. But what if they were to meet each other the day after they had met Jesus? Picture the scene, if you will. It's just before sunrise on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Animals are beginning to stir and the fishing fleet is heading towards the shore with the night's catch. As you look along the quayside, there are two people looking out across the water, deep in their own thoughts. Both of them haven't slept a wink all night, their minds forever churning over, trying to make sense of it all. They stand a distance away from each other, but they are each aware of the other. Yesterday, this place was crowded, hundreds upon hundreds of people, crowded together in one place. All had tried to get a piece of Jesus. Now they have all gone. And these two are the only ones left. Less than 24 hours ago, they both had an encounter with Jesus. And now they needed to share what had happened to them. The woman recognises Jairus in his robes. He's an important man around here, the leader of the synagogue. Jairus is sure that he has seen this woman before today, but cannot quite place her, which is unusual, as he normally prides himself on being good at recognising people's faces. Good morning, sir. What an incredible day it was, with all the crowds and Jesus. It certainly was. Was that where he'd seen her? He still wasn't sure, but he decided not to tell her what had happened to him until he could remember just who she was. Sir, can I share my story with you? He nodded, and they sat on a low wall with their backs to the sea. Life has been so hard for me for the last 12 years. I've had no life to speak of. I've been unable to touch those I love. I've been unclean according to the law. Jairus tried not to show any emotion, not to recoil, but it took every piece of his willpower not to pull back from her. 12 years of exhaustion, unable to be a proper wife, unable to care for my family. Each day was a nightmare, unable to work or cook. 12 years of misery. All this because the scriptures say, I am unclean. Can you understand that? Jairus looked at the woman. All he could feel for her was a deep sympathy. He knew that she deserved at least honesty from him. No, I cannot understand that, but only because I cannot imagine how bad that could be. 12 years is such a long time. Couldn't you see a priest to be cleansed? No, sir. I've had woman's bleeding for 12 years without ceasing. No priest would declare me clean. I was a woman of means. but I have none now, because every coin I had was spent on doctors. They all told me that they could cure me. Not one of them during those 12 years made any difference at all. I even tried remedies from our ancient books, like crushed and ground shells from the ostrich egg. Sir, I was at the end of my tether, unable to break free from the prison cell of disease and heartbreak. I tried everything, but nothing worked. Jairus knew that he should say something, say anything to console her, but no words would come. All these years working his way up in the leadership of the synagogue, surely he could find the words to help this woman, but none came. He could sense, however, a change in the woman's demeanour. She no longer looked beaten down. Her back was straightening. "Sir, can I speak to you about Jesus of Nazareth?" He nodded as she turned towards him, and he could see the smile, and her eyes were literally twinkling like stars. "Sir, I had heard about Jesus and his teachings. Plus, I heard that he had healed many people. Even lepers were cleansed. Demons were cast out. In fact, I heard that a man in the synagogue had a withered hand and it was restored. Can you believe that?" "Oh yes, I believe," answered Jairus. "So I began to think, if Jesus can do all these things, then surely he can heal my bleeding. But there was a problem. I was unclean, so I couldn't mix with people or touch Jesus. After all, the scripture said so. I knew that if only I could touch the hem of his garment, I would be healed. I just needed to get close to Jesus. But those crowds yesterday were so big and tightly packed that it seemed impossible to get close to him. I sensed my chance had gone as Jesus started to move further away from me and seemed to be leaving." The woman paused for a moment and looked wistfully into the distance, remembering her chance disappearing as Jesus was moving away. But a smile played on her mouth as she went on. There was no way that I was going to be denied by those crowds who were milling about Jesus. I knew each person that I touched would become unclean. But if only I could touch the hem of his garment, then I would be healed and they would be cleansed. I set off from the back of the crowd, and although Jesus was moving away from me slowly, I was catching up on him. Occasionally I would drop to my knees and crawl through the forest of legs. Nothing was going to stop me, not seeing as I'd come this far. Jairus suddenly recalled just who this woman was. "It was you, wasn't it?" he said. He realised that by her look he had been too abrupt, and apologised to her and asked her to continue. "I got right up to Jesus and touched his hem. The crowd just carried on as if I wasn't there, and then they stopped dead in their tracks. The flow of blood also stopped completely." The woman looked at Jairus, and then Jesus spoke. He said, "Who touched my clothes?" Jairus was engrossed. Even though he had witnessed all of this yesterday, he could remember the disciples trying to look around to identify just who had touched the garment. There were too many people to find out who had done it. Jesus knew somebody had touched his garment, and Jairus remembered this woman coming forward, looking afraid and trembling from head to foot. She told Jesus everything about planning to touch his garment so that she would be healed. All Jairus could think of at the time was that this was stopping Jesus from healing his daughter. The woman finished her story, I was laying in front of Jesus and he said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." The woman looked at Jairus, trying to gauge his reaction. Was he one of the Jews who hated Jesus? Did he think she was lying? But then why would she lie? As Jairus turned to her, she could see for the first time the kindness in his eyes. She could also see that his eyes were moist and the traces of tears were running down his face. He turned to her and said, "I was there." For a moment she was confused, but kept quiet. She could tell that he wanted to speak. "Just before you touched Jesus' garment, I'd gone to him and begged him to come to my house because my 12-year-old daughter was at the point of death. It was my house that Jesus was going to when you touched his garment." The woman looked at Jairus with her mouth open, shaking her head gently. "Anyway, I have a confession to make. At that point I was very angry with you. I believed that you had delayed Jesus from coming to my house. What was worse, people from the synagogue came to tell me that my daughter had died. I'm ashamed to tell you that at that instance I hated you because you had received your healing, but my daughter hadn't. Please forgive me for those thoughts." It was the woman's turn to just nod. "As you left, Jesus told me not to be afraid and to believe. So I did just that and believed that Jesus would sort this out. Anyway, once we got to the house, there were crowds there crying and weeping and wailing for my dead daughter. When Jesus saw all the people, he said, 'Why make all this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping.' You can imagine the crowd went wild, laughing at him and making fun of him. But I believed and I was not afraid. So my wife and I, along with Jesus and 3 of his disciples, Simon Peter, James and John, entered my daughter's room. Jesus just said, 'Little girl, I say to you, arise.' Jairus turned to the woman and said, 'You know something? I knew in my head that my beautiful daughter had died before Jesus was able to get to her. But I believed Jesus. I was not afraid. I was full of peace. I knew that Jesus would raise her from the dead.' The woman and the synagogue leader sat together with tears in their eyes. 2 people who had experienced the love of Jesus and would never be the same again. Thank you for listening to that story, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to go to your Bibles and read the story for yourself, it appears in Matthew chapter 9 verses 18 to 26, also in Mark chapter 5 verses 22 to 43, and Luke chapter 8 verses 40 to 56. I thank you once again. God bless you, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.